Hey guys, remember to like the video and hit subscribe.
Yeah, are you thinking and seriously considering changing your business practices as a result of tariffs? Because that is what he is trying to do. He's trying to convince people like you to start going and trying to support American companies. And then it's by you doing that, incentivize the person who's considering making a factory and doing it here, right? And that's their big push, and that's what they're arguing is working. You know, you have companies like TSMC who makes chips, right? Who makes the chips that we use for literally everything, not Doritos, but microchips.
To end that part of the discussion, then I think it entirely comes down to availability of what we can make.
Apparently, the majority report talked about Ezra Klein's abundance.
Harris is going to win the election.
Yeah.
And this was going to be part of... I sort of feel bad for Ezra Klein. Because I think there was like this expectation that Harris is going to win the election.
Yeah.
And this was going to be part of like the big neoliberal pushback on the success that Sanders and Warren had in pushing their agenda into the Biden administration, which was greater labor strength and a more robust antitrust regime that would undermine consolidated economic power, which of course also has translated into consolidated political power. And the way that I think, and I don't know that Ezra Klein was the, I don't think he was the mastermind behind this. I think it was obviously, it's like you can go back and you can look at it. It was like the Nicholson Institute and Cato, I think, was a little bit there. I mean, it's like the third way, neoliberal in the most specific way. The idea that the market will provide solutions for society if government is not in the way. And this is an ideology that was, has been prominent for 40 years in this country. And then Harris doesn't win. And then, like Klein in many instances, he hasn't engaged in sort of the politics in the same way that he had for years before. But his whole brand was to be to provide analysis that was divorced of ideology and not influenced by political pressure.
Right.
And that shtick worked for a while until people started becoming aware, and people became more aware, and frankly, the terrain changed where people started to understand, like, that supposed absence of ideology isn't in and of itself an ideology.
It's not possible when you're talking about politics.
Well, also, the idea that any of this technical, that supposed, policy stuff is divorced from politics is also silly. But, like, he has an ideology because he's not necessarily going in the way. And then there's also this question of, like, there's not many generalists like Klein. Like, he cut his teeth by becoming, the generalist expert at healthcare. That was what his big thing was in the run-up to the ACA stuff. And it's like, look, I know a lot about Social Security. But if I'm sitting next to someone who's worked on Social Security policy, they know more. But nobody's going to listen to that guy. That guy doesn't have a show.
Right.
That guy's not an op-ed columnist. And so this is sort of, there's a couple of clips that are out there now of Klein, where one was where he was talking about with Jon Stewart, where he was talking about in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a provision to expand broadband. And he goes on and on, like, there was so many roadblocks put up by the Democrats in that legislation that the Democrats have to get out of their way. And then one of Biden's national economic advisors goes like, dude, that was the Republicans.
Yeah.
That was a concession we made to the Republicans to get this bill passed. Like, there's concurrent reporting that show that was what the ask was. Republicans are always, and they'll use regulation as a means to do it, but they're always putting roadblocks up there to prevent corporations from being directed to do stuff. And again, those corporations, incidentally, those cable outlets, what do they have in every region? It's a monopoly. And he would get away with that if we were in a different era where somebody couldn't hop on Twitter and go, dude, there's reporting. Jon Stewart's not supposed to know that.
Right.
Oh my God, it almost sort of sounds like Sam is kind of giving a little bit of leeway to the Democrats. You need to watch that, the talk with Stewart and Klein about rural broadband. My biggest critique for Ezra Klein, when he talks about the abundance stuff, when it comes to that, especially that example, because I think I've heard him bring it up several times, is, and it has to do with the high-speed rail and everything as well. And I let Ezra slide on this, I don't know why. But I do wish he would name more examples. Like, he'll say the government throws up a lot of unnecessary roadblocks, but then he also said that, smog has significantly improved in California and it's way better than it used to be. It's like, okay, well, then if we're going to believe the first and second thing, what are the unnecessary roadblocks? I'm really curious what these are, because I've heard him say that a lot. There's a lot of unnecessary roadblocks. Like, okay, well, which ones are unnecessary? I want to know.
And here is another instance where he is on Crooked Media. He's being asked what is not necessarily a particularly difficult question.
Although Favreau here does read a very good critique of this book by Zephyr Teachout, who is of the anti-monopolist wing that Sam just described. Very much so. Ran for governor here in New York. Stays a good voice on this.
Well, she was a colleague of Tim Wu's, who was at one point working in the Biden administration in antitrust and whatnot. And she's also a professor at that as well.
You mentioned some of the critique from the left. I'm sure you've read all of it, or read most of it. I'm sure you've talked about the Zephyr Teachout review of abundance. I want to get your reaction to one part of that because I think...
We should also just add, this is caught up by crooked media because there was like a... Good.
I think it summarizes a lot of the criticism on the left. I mean, you mentioned the Bernie side. There's also a Warren-esque critique as well. And she writes, I still can't tell after reading Abundance whether Klein and Thompson are seeking something fairly small bore and correct, we need zoning reform, or non-trivial and deeply regressive, we need deregulation, or whether there's room within Abundance for anti-monopoly politics and a more full-throated unleashing of American potential. Matt Brunig has a similar critique. He says it would be a huge mistake to sideline whatever focus there is on welfare state expansion and economic egalitarianism in favor of a focus on administrative burdens and construction. It's not a book about like monopolistic...
All right, pause it for 1 second. I just want to walk through what those critiques were. Largely, people have said, critics of the left, of this book, that there are specific provisions in there that sure. And I think, anybody would concede there are good regulations and bad regulations. And having a, evidence-based look at some of these regulations, definitely a worthwhile endeavor. Maybe some should be rolled back on local levels in specific areas. But to promote deregulation in and of itself isn't
his whole shtick mostly just analyzing things from a high level and presenting ideas in an abstract manner? That's not really appropriate for policy analysis. You can be a little bit ideological, but at the end of the day, we're going to need you to tell us what exactly you're talking about, right? Because, Sam's about to say it. You can't just sit, because at that point, you basically just become a conservative. Oh, we need to deregulate everything. Really? That's the answer? I don't think Ezra Klein believes that, by the way. I don't think he believes you need to deregulate everything. But if you're not going to give specific examples about what types of regulations you think are harmful or that need to go, well, then it kind of sounds like that is what you're talking about. It's just deregulating everything.
A upward redistribution of wealth. Regulations largely inhibit corporate profit making because they basically say, we're not going to allow you to socialize the costs.
Yeah.
And privatize the profits.
Right.
And so that was, that like, Zephyr Teachout says, like, I can't tell if this book is meant to be a series of small reforms, which yes.
Are acceptable, yes.
I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yep.
I mean, go around and people say, like, hey, we should change regulations so we can build more housing in New York City.
Exactly. Or if it's supposed to be a larger ideological argument against deregulation, or if in this whole calculation of where the Democratic Party should go, if it's this big treaties, where does anti-monopolistic policy fit into this whole sort of milieu?
Yes, and that question, those final two, well, I think it gets answered by Klein, and not in a great way in just a second. But I was more sympathetic to the idea that it was just kind of a small book, and I don't mean to be insulting in that way. But it's the branding of it and the promotion of it, because Klein is a big name, makes it sound like this is the roadmap for the Democrats in the future. Whereas, as Matt just pointed out, folks that are advocates for housing already incorporate these critiques into their vision for affordable housing in this country. But it is maybe, one or two paragraphs? It's a part of the whole. Because absent a repealing of, say, the Fair Cloth Amendment so that the federal government can fund public housing again, absent broad decommodification, absent going after the private equity firms that are buying up our housing, or the algorithms like RealPage that are artificially inflating rents so that housing is more unaffordable than it's ever been in this country, the part about cutting red tape that we all agree with is not going to have the desired effect. In fact, it may just further commodify housing and empower private interests to raise rents regardless of the supply. So it has to be paired with a vision that takes on corporate power. And so my kind of view of what he was arguing was, I don't know if Klein's hostile to what's being said there, but perhaps the book just, is presented as if it's a bigger vision for the world than it actually is in practice. But the way he responds to Teachout's critique here makes me think that perhaps the instinct that some of us had might have been a bit too generous.
Ooh. About like monopolistic power practices and corporate concentration. So I get that. I guess to the question that Teachout asked, is there room in Abundance for a critique of concentrated economic power and anti-monopoly politics and all that?
I'm trying to think about the nicest way to say this. My friends in the whole problem is oligarchy part of the party, and I believe a good part of our problems are oligarchy. But there are certain kinds of problems they're then willing to see and certain kinds they're not as willing to see. Mm-hmm. So in housing, I find a lot of them get obsessed with this idea.
Oh, I'm going to 1,000,000,000% agree with Ezra here. Never mind. I super agree with what he just said right there. That's you guys too, by the way. He's talking about you, okay? There are certain problems that they want to see, and there are certain problems they don't want to see, okay? He's talking about the billionaires are responsible for everything crowd. That's you guys, okay? Fuck all of you.
Kinds of problems they're then willing to see and certain kinds they're not as willing to see. Mm-hmm. So in housing, I find a lot of them get obsessed with this idea that private investors are buying up a bunch of rental housing. And this is an extremely small part of the market right now, and it's just not the main problem in housing. But because it is the villain they are comfortable having, it is where they want to put their focus. Yeah. Kamala Harris, I was very excited when she brought out her big plan to build 3 million units of housing, but her plan never would have achieved anything like it. It did have a big thing about trying to do something about this private investor buying up housing issue, though. So you can really get, I think, taken off the track. A thing I found really interesting in Zephyr's review was that, is it something good and small like zoning reform? And try doing zoning reform if you think it's small. well, right? Or something bad like deregulation. Okay, interesting, right?
Yeah.
Deregulation is a word that I think shuts liberals down a bit. And it shouldn't. A lot of what we're pointing out in the book is that the player that is often most regulated is not the market, it's the government itself. If you want to understand why the government can't build public housing effectively, I mean, in many ways, the federal government building public housing is now functionally illegal. It's been regulated out of possibility. If you want to know why we didn't build California high-speed rail, if you want to know why it's so expensive to build affordable housing in a lot of liberal jurisdictions when you trigger public money, it is because of the regulations we put on government.
Okay, here's the point. Who's the we? He says that the oligarchy is not the problem. And what is an oligarchy? An oligarchy is people who have amassed so much economic wealth.
I wish I could remember the specific example of this, but I actually think one of the issues, oh man, was this in LA? It was some housing project that was going to be built. I don't know if LA does this or San Francisco does this. I want to say it was California. There's a government regulation that says like a certain percentage of housing that's built. It might have been New York actually. A certain percentage of housing that's built has to be like low cost housing or something. Or it was some really dumb thing that like if you build this much housing, it also has to, you have to build this much housing that's like for low cost renters or whatever. And it was just like retarded. It's like what, just like let people build more shit. Who the f cares? The problem will sort itself out. And I feel like this thing ended up getting in the way of some major project. I feel like I read about this so long ago. I feel like this is like a 6 or 7 year old thing that I remember reading about. And ended up shutting down like some huge housing reinvestment thing or some huge project because the requirements that they were setting for how much of this different types of housing that got built was like retarded.
That we go from a plutonomy to a plutocracy.
Right.
And he says, we put so much of a burden on the government that on itself, that the government can't do things for the public good. Who is the we?
Yep.
Because when we say, does he mean?
Because this is probably not coming from Republicans, would be my guess. This is probably a liberal progressive problem.
Like 90% of the people out there? Or does he mean the we being the people who send the lobbyists, who have the money, who buy the elections, who buy the legislature, who provide all of the roadblocks to doing what supposedly we are trying to do? I mean, this is the fundamental flaw in his.
Sam is falling into the exact trap that Ezra complains about, which is that some people are very willing to see some problems. So like Ezra even says, like there are some oligarchical or plutocratic issues with our system where we should all agree that that price fixing thing with that rental company, that was bad, right? There are certain practices that private companies that private equity can engage in that we can all agree is probably bad and needs additional regulation or should be outlawed or whatever, that's fine. But as soon as you mention like, okay, well, what about some of these restrictions? It's like, no. It's all the billionaires. It's all the private equity. That's it. That's the only problem. It's just those people and it's just the conservatives and that's it. And if we have infinite progressivism when it comes to government policy and everything, then everything will be like, oh, okay, well, now this is kind of dumb, but.
His thinking is that he thinks there is some sort of like entity that is static, that there is no such thing as power dynamics, that he has no sense of power. This is what has always been absence of his politics. And the reason why you don't recognize power from his position is because you're not on the losing end of it in his politics. The horse knows the rider more than the rider knows the horse.
And when he's talking about the regulations we, as you say, who is the we that we put on government, I'm not necessarily sure what he means by that. I would have to read more of his book to figure that
Joanna
out.
shuts on about. I'm pretty sure Joanna's a lefty, so I'm sure she does.
But it seems like he's ignoring the fact that oftentimes this red tape and the lag in delivering for people, it seems like a bit kind of reheated deliverance arguments for the Biden administration from 2020, by the way. The reason the government doesn't deliver for people is because of the regulations we put on government. Or could it be the fact that, unfortunately, we have legalized campaign finance almost.
It's going to be, they're falling into the same trap. Like progressives can never, ever look at. It's the flip side of the conservative problem. It's like listening to the Gary's economics guy argue with that one dude where Gary's like, the world is fucked. You have no hope. Nothing is going to change. And then the other dude is like, actually, the world's not fucked. Every single person can just become an entrepreneur and start their own business. And it's like, oh boy, wow, what a fruitful conversation. And they're doing the same thing where it's like, I'm sure Ezra would acknowledge that, yeah, there's issues with everything you guys are bringing up, but it's not the only problem. And sometimes it's not even the biggest problem.
Bribery in this country, where there's an influx of corporate money, and on the local level in particular, the yield for corporate interests is higher because they can get more for their money, basically. So there's all this self-dealing that happens on the local level, and they have to take into account this campaign contributor and not run afoul of them if they want to build something here. Or this real estate investor is mad that we want to build affordable housing near their complex or whatever. That's the issue. That's the issue with stuff not being delivered quickly enough. And he seems to ignore that.
Well, that's the whole point. He doesn't even seem to be aware of it, because even in that question, if he had an awareness of it.
He didn't even seem to be aware of it. He literally said there are issues with, like, he said, and there is some oligarchical problems or whatever. He literally said that. He did say this.
He would stop and say, he wouldn't say we. Because it's like, who is the we?
Yeah.
Like, are we preventing more public transportation?
Minneapolis literally did zoning reform.
Right.
It's a progressive government. The other thing is like this is all sort of a larger problem of like how do we get back to building things in America? And it is so insane to me that we are having this concept without reference to, say, the country that's actually building things, which is China. Like they greenlit flying taxis the other day. They definitely don't have a shortage of housing and things like that. It's not because they're letting the capitalists, bequeath abundance to them. They are controlling their activity strictly. And
yeah, but China has exactly the opposite problem. No, aren't there? I feel like I've seen images of whole cities in China that are empty because they command economy so much new construction, and either people didn't want to move there or people couldn't afford it, and they basically have like these ghost cities, or they ended up completely demolishing some of these places. But again, I feel like progressives and conservatives do this on the other end can only ever look at one thing. Oh my God.
Channeling it towards social ends.
Our infrastructure is falling apart, although, the Biden administration did make some good investments in that, but it's not as efficient as it could be because these are subsidies oftentimes for private contractors. And that is where we see, because under capitalism, these guys have to get rich, where we see some of the lack of efficiency and the frustration that he's describing there. And I also
like, please, I know that this is just my inner conservative. I don't even know what this is, but like, please stop saying like, get rich. Like getting rich is bad. Getting rich is good. Everybody should want to get rich. It's a good thing. It's fine if some people are making money. If somebody's getting rich because they're providing some really good service or some really good product, or they're doing something that everybody values or likes, that's fine. We should champion that. Okay? Just make sure people get rich doing good things for the economy or good things for other people. That's fine. You don't have to demonize somebody getting rich. Okay? If somebody's leveraging their, wealth or something in a way that is detrimental to the average person, that's bad. But then talk about that. Don't just demonize the wealth part.
Just like don't understand when he talks, he mentions there that it's
mentioned some
kind of, I forget his exact phrasing, but when he mentions that it's kind of illegal for the government to build public housing,
Shouldn't be.
But why is that the case?
That's a regulation by the capitalists.
He never.
That's the whole point.
They'll say capitalists here, but they won't say homeowners. Interesting.
Point. It's not like it's as if it's just sort of like dropped out of the heavens, and we need to be very cautious about this. No, that's not the way legislation is formed, and that's what the very bizarre thing about it. He is standing as if it's not like an amorphous thing that different waxes and wanes at different points.
Yeah, it's this annoying kind of habit that I think this like.
Yes, this is exactly the good point.
But it's this annoying habit of gesturing towards like what the left is saying or what critics are saying without addressing it at all.
Well, but what it ultimately is a critique of government. By saying that we can't, government just can't do this.
Yeah.
No, he literally, oh God, don't make me an Ezra simp so much, because so much of him. Like, Ezra literally said it's not just government being unable to do things, and it's not just government regulating capitalism. Sometimes it's government regulating itself. He literally said this. He's not saying at all that government can't do it. He's saying that sometimes the government fucks itself up doing it.
Government. By saying that we can't, government just can't do this.
Yeah.
It is there as if there is something structurally wrong with government, as opposed to there's something structurally wrong with our society, and that being that money is hampering government's ability to do it, because when government does something, it cuts into private money's profit.
Yep.
They don't want.
But that's not even always true. Like the military-industrial complex is funded by government money. Tesla and the electric vehicles tax credits, was greatly helped by government money. Government rezoning or upzoning areas can help private. I don't know. Whatever. Okay.
Public transportation, and that they in that instance is the fossil fuel industry
Or Uber.
or Elon Musk with his Hyperloop
And self-driving promises. You can put that in.
I mean, that's the dynamic. That's why the people who are obsessed with oligarchy, it is because it fundamentally, almost definitionally, the existence of an oligarchy undermines the capacity of government to do things that benefit the vast majority of people. That is definitionally the problem with an oligarchy. Not that I hate that guy because look at the way he dresses, or, they have so much money, or just pure. He reduces the issue with oligarchs and with concentrated wealth to an aesthetic.
Right.
As opposed to fundamentally undermining government's capacity to provide for a wide range of people.
And
again, all governments redistribute wealth and benefit, and it's just a question of which direction does it go.
And yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a theme to respond to your critics that are obsessed with the oligarchy, as he derisively says, while not addressing the problems that oligarchy present to the very part of his book that is being criticized, or the very central thesis to his book. And again, if this was something that was marketed as, hey, these are some friendly tips that local governments can engage in to further along helping their constituents, I don't think the reaction would be what it is. But the fact that it's abundance, and it's on every liberal podcast here, and this is about the vision for the Democratic Party, and you have Josh Shapiro saying,
they hate this because these guys are still, I don't know about Sam, but definitely Emma, they're still this like Bernie bro faction that are just praying that the American population is so close to recognizing that Bernie Sanders is like the future, and that everybody just wants to be super duper ultra progressive and quasi-socialist, and we just need single payer healthcare and public government housing, the decommodification of everything that we think is too expensive, that's the way forward. And they're upset because that view has been slipping more and more from the Democratic Party. Bernie was less popular in this election than the last and then the one before it, and they're just so ass-pained about that they're like desperately holding on, and they're so angry of the neoliberal faction and the Democratic Party, you know, having any sway whatsoever. And it's just like,
all aboard the abundance agenda train. It is a really bad time to be making this argument.
Well, also,
and it's a really bad time to be making the argument that government is the problem, especially as we have a
good one up for grabs.
That government is the problem, and also maybe we shouldn't be too focused on the oligarchy, as we have a billionaire oligarch who is destroying our government right now. And so, like, to the point of, I kind of feel bad for him. It is like poorly
I was being
timed.
facetious.
I know, but that was my first instinct. That was my first instinct, right? Because I wanted to be fair to it. But when I heard how defensive he got about Zephyr Teachout's accurate critique of the book, okay, so we're just reheating neoliberalism again. Again.
We should be
Not the
extremely
time.
angry as a society with the people who have been charged with the economic priorities of this country, which is who Ezra and Derek Thompson are defending with this book, saying we just need to let them cook. Actually, we're behind everywhere. We're behind on green energy. We're behind on personal vehicles. We're behind on, healthcare. We're behind on all of this stuff. And the idea that it's just like, oh, we need to let the financiers and capitalists like decide how to do it. We're back where we were in the New Deal, where we realized actually we need the government to build this stuff because these people don't actually know how to unleash the
People don't know how to build houses? What?
capacity of this country.
Yeah.
Well, they know how to unleash the productive capacity, their own productive
Profit-seeking,
capacity. I mean,
yeah.
you know, the theory has always been pursue your self-interest and it'll be best for society. And the fact is, no, what happens more often than not, and we can see this in the concentration of wealth, is in the pursuit of their own best interest, they necessarily inhibit other people from getting wealth.
And they've all been banking on
Like, that's a zero-sum assumption. Well, I mean, not to do the invisible hand memes, but like every single time a company is seeking their best interest, it's to the detriment of other people. That includes you. You understand that, right? You guys are a capitalist company that you're competing in a market for attention. You sell advertisement space on YouTube, another capitalist company that you leverage to make money for your own. Like what? Like.
Self-interest and it'll be best for society. And the fact is, no, what happens more often than not, and we can see this in the concentration of wealth, is in the pursuit of their own best interest, they necessarily inhibit other people from getting wealth.
And they've all been banking on AI, and now China does that better than us, or at least cheaper than us too.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a little bit frustrating to even have to have this conversation with somebody who is nominally on the liberal or the left side of the Democratic side. The numbers the numbers are clear about wealth concentration and how we are at extreme levels that is immiserating the rest of the population. You think that housing is inoculated from that? I mean, I would guess he would say that's too simplistic of an argument, and it's okay. It's a question.
That's exactly what he said.
Fine, but
I mean, they talk about housing without talking about the 2008 financial crisis. So I mean, they're not deep here.
The point is just that it's about what are we emphasizing. We've said this before in the
I don't even, not to get, the 2008 financial crisis didn't even have much, wasn't even really about housing. What was the point of that comment?
Too simplistic of an argument, and it's okay. It's a question.
That's exactly what he said.
Fine, but
I mean, they talk about housing without talking about the 2008 financial crisis. So I mean, they're not deep here.
The point is just that it's about what are we emphasizing. We've said this before in the context of being in the news. You have a finite number of things that you can focus on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we're going to always have fun, whatever, on our show. But what you choose to focus on is even more, I think, indicative of your ideology than what you say, and that's the problem with this book.
True.
I don't even care about the book as much as I do the movement. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, the fact of the matter is, a guy with a New York op-ed. I mean, these guys are not writing a book that is meant to be small bore, technical housing reform on a small.
Exactly.
That's not what they're doing.
How do we square the billionaire circle with the democracy square?
Exactly. This is like, you know, how do we make the Democratic Party Mark Cuban safe? Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show.
Fuck Mark Cuban. True. We only want the coolest and the hippest of progressives in our party. What do you mean? It wasn't about housing? It wasn't about our housing markets. It was about really dumb banking regulations that allowed people to connect certain things to financial markets that probably should never be connected to financial markets. And then the runaway incentives that were created as a result of that. It was housing that happened to be the target, but theoretically, this could happen to any. Theoretically, I think it could happen to any asset class. But it was it wasn't about like housing policies or things related to building housing or zoning housing. It had to do with financial regulations. Hassan is why. Okay, Hassan, we got Hassan drama. Oh boy, thank God. It seems like they've lost the plot. Ezra is saying we need to, as liberals, show effective governance again. Ezra focused on an inability of liberal policies to get completed, and they are talking about it like he's saying government isn't as efficient as government. True. Hassan is whining in Hoscourt about H3 Reddit. No, okay, I'm not getting triggered by chat. Hassan is whining in Hoscourt about H3 Reddit posts that point out that he grew up filthy rich. But since the article didn't get his dad's exact net worth correct, Hassan will now try to use that as proof that everything they ever said about him is a lie. Oh no. Nah, bro, you still grew up super rich and were never dead ass broke. Oh wow,